Late at night, on a quiet highway, flashing red and blue lights suddenly appear in a driver's rearview mirror. The vehicle slows down and carefully pulls over to the side of the road. Within seconds, a police officer steps out of the patrol car and begins walking toward the vehicle. But before the officer even reaches the driver's window, something small happens. Something many drivers never notice in the moment. As the officer walks past the back of the car, their hand briefly reaches out and touches the vehicle's taillight. For many people watching body camera footage later, that moment raises a surprising question. Why would a police officer touch the taillight during a traffic stop? But here's the real question. Is this simple gesture just a routine safety habit taught in police training, or does it carry a deeper investigative purpose that most drivers don't realize? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Traffic stops are among the most common encounters between civilians and law enforcement. Every day across the United States, thousands of drivers are pulled over for reasons ranging from speeding and traffic violations to minor equipment issues like broken lights. Although many of these encounters last only a few minutes, they take place within a detailed legal framework shaped by constitutional protections, court decisions, and police training procedures. Under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, citizens are protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. Courts have interpreted a traffic stop as a temporary seizure because the driver is not free to leave until the officer concludes the interaction. Legal scholars in the field of constitutional law explain that for a traffic stop to be lawful, an officer must have a legitimate reason to initiate it. Most commonly, that reason is the observation of a traffic violation, such as speeding, failing to signal, or driving with defective equipment. Once the officer activates emergency lights and the driver pulls over, a standard sequence of events typically begins. The officer positions the patrol vehicle behind the car, exits the vehicle, and approaches the driver's side window. It is during this approach that the small but widely discussed action sometimes occurs. The officer briefly touches the taillight. To someone inside the car, the gesture may go completely unnoticed. But when people later watch police body camera footage online, the moment often sparks curiosity and speculation. Over time, several explanations have emerged for why some officers perform this action. One explanation often mentioned in law enforcement discussions is documentation. Decades ago, before the widespread use of dashboard cameras and body cameras, officers sometimes relied on physical evidence to confirm their presence at a vehicle. By touching the taillight, the officer could leave fingerprints on the vehicle. If an encounter later became part of an investigation, those prints could theoretically confirm that the officer had approached that specific car. However, modern policing now relies heavily on recording technology. Many patrol vehicles are equipped with dash cameras, and officers frequently wear body-worn cameras that record their interactions with drivers. Because of this technological shift, the fingerprint explanation is no longer as significant as it once was. Another explanation often discussed by police trainers relates to situational awareness. Traffic stops can involve uncertainty because officers do not always know who is inside the vehicle or how occupants might respond. By briefly touching the vehicle while walking toward it, the officer establishes physical awareness of the car's position and signals their presence to the occupants. Some officers also say the action has become a habit, developed through training over many years. Even though procedures evolve over time, certain behaviors remain common simply because they have been passed down through generations of law enforcement instruction. Legal experts emphasize that the gesture itself is usually considered minimal from a constitutional standpoint. Courts generally distinguish between touching the exterior of a vehicle and conducting a search. Because the outside surface of a car is exposed to public view, drivers typically have a reduced expectation of privacy compared to areas like a home. For that reason, brief contact with the exterior of a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop is rarely considered a violation of constitutional protections. Still, attorneys often point out that the legality of a traffic stop depends on much larger factors than a single gesture. Courts tend to focus on questions such as whether the officer had a lawful reason to initiate the stop, whether the duration of the stop was reasonable, and whether any search or further investigation followed proper legal standards. One major Supreme Court decision that frequently appears in legal discussions about traffic stops is Rodriguez v. United States. In that ruling, the court concluded that officers may not extend a traffic stop longer than necessary to address the reason for the stop unless additional reasonable suspicion develops. This decision highlights an important principle. A traffic stop must remain connected to its original purpose unless new facts arise that justify expanding the investigation. When analyzing police procedures, legal experts often emphasize that context matters. Small details, like how an officer approached the vehicle, how long the stop lasted, or what observations were made, can sometimes become important in legal disputes. Defense attorneys reviewing a case might carefully examine body camera footage to determine whether the officer followed department policy and constitutional limits. Prosecutors may look at the same footage to confirm that the officer acted within the boundaries established by law. In many cases, the taillight touch becomes just one small detail within a much larger timeline of events. For drivers, traffic stops can feel stressful or uncertain, especially if they are unfamiliar with how these encounters typically unfold. Legal professionals who specialize in traffic law often advise drivers to remain calm, keep their hands visible, and follow lawful instructions during a stop. Disagreements about whether the stop was justified are generally handled later in court rather than during the roadside encounter itself. This approach allows judges and attorneys to examine evidence carefully and determine whether proper procedures were followed. As public interest in police body camera footage has grown, more people have begun analyzing the small details of traffic stops. Videos posted online often show officers approaching vehicles in different ways, depending on their training and department policies. Some officers touch the taillight, others do not. These variations illustrate how policing practices can differ from one jurisdiction to another. What remains consistent, however, is the legal framework governing traffic stops. Constitutional protections, court decisions, and department guidelines all shape how officers conduct these encounters. Understanding those principles can help drivers interpret what they see in videos and in real-life roadside interactions. The moment an officer touches a taillight may appear mysterious at first, but in most cases, it reflects a routine habit tied to training practices rather than a hidden investigative tactic. Yet that small action has sparked a much larger conversation about policing procedures, driver rights, and how everyday encounters with law enforcement are conducted. And that leads to an important question. When you see an officer briefly touch a vehicle's taillight during a stop, do you think it's mainly a safety precaution, a training habit, or something else entirely? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more about the legal realities behind common roadside encounters, consider subscribing for future videos that break down how the law actually works during everyday traffic stops. After the initial interaction, the officer typically engages the driver in conversation. Commonly, they request identification, proof of insurance, and vehicle registration. While these documents are being verified, the officer observes the driver's behavior, the interior of the vehicle, and any other occupants present. Many legal analysts emphasize that officers are trained to remain alert throughout this period. Even subtle signs like nervous movements, inconsistent answers, or visible contraband can influence how the encounter unfolds. This vigilance does not necessarily imply suspicion of criminal activity, but it is a critical part of standard procedure for officer safety. In some instances, a minor violation or observation can lead to additional questioning. For example, if the officer notices a broken light, expired tags, or improper seatbelt use, they may issue a citation or conduct a limited investigation to address that issue. Importantly, any action taken must stay within the scope permitted by law, as established by precedent cases such as Terry v. Ohio, 1968, and Rodriguez v. United States, 2015. During the encounter, body camera footage often provides a clear record. Analysts and legal commentators frequently point out that reviewing such recordings helps clarify whether the officer followed proper protocol. It also protects both the driver and the officer, documenting actions taken in real time and reducing ambiguity over what occurred during the stop. Now, consider the role of physical gestures during this encounter, like the moment an officer touches a taillight or the vehicle itself. As discussed earlier, these actions have historical roots in training practices and officer safety techniques. Modern technology has largely replaced the original purpose, such as leaving fingerprints, but the gestures remain as part of standard procedure in many departments. From a legal perspective, the minor physical interaction does not constitute a search or seizure. Courts distinguish between the exterior surfaces of a vehicle, which are exposed to public view, and areas where occupants retain a reasonable expectation of privacy. Therefore, the gesture alone rarely has constitutional implications. However, the overall lawfulness of the traffic stop still depends on whether the officer had a valid reason to initiate the stop, conducted it within a reasonable time frame, and complied with legal requirements for any follow-up investigation. For drivers, understanding these nuances is critical. Remaining calm, following lawful instructions, and documenting the encounter when possible, through dash cams or personal recordings, can help ensure the interaction proceeds safely. It also provides a record if the stop becomes the subject of legal review later. Legal experts caution that every traffic stop is context-specific. While small gestures like touching a taillight may seem unusual or raise questions, they are rarely the determining factor in a court case. Judges and attorneys focus instead on broader issues: the officer's justification for the stop, the duration, any searches conducted, and the adherence to established traffic laws and constitutional protections. In conclusion, what might appear to be a minor, almost trivial action, the brief touch of a taillight, is actually part of a complex interplay between officer safety, historical police training, and legal frameworks governing traffic stops. It serves as a reminder of the many layers involved in even routine law enforcement interactions. The next time you are pulled over, noticing a gesture like this should not necessarily raise alarm. It is generally a procedural habit rather than an indication of hidden investigative tactics. At the same time, understanding your rights, remaining calm, and documenting the encounter when appropriate are always valuable strategies for navigating these situations safely. So, the question remains for viewers. When you see an officer touch a vehicle during a traffic stop, do you interpret it as routine procedure, a safety precaution, or something more? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective. And for more in-depth analysis of traffic laws, police procedures, and your rights as a driver, don't forget to subscribe. Our channel breaks down complex legal issues into clear, actionable insights so you can stay informed and protected on the road. This concludes our detailed look at why an officer might touch your taillight during a traffic stop, the legal context surrounding such encounters, and how you, as a driver, can navigate these situations with knowledge and confidence. So, the question remains for you. When an officer touches your vehicle during a traffic stop, do you see it as a routine safety procedure, a sign of suspicion, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective.